Okay, let's unpack this. We're jumping into a section of Dr. Darren Cannell's book, Coaching Sports to Internet Brats.
Right.
This deep dive isn't about the whole book, but specifically a really interesting part, focusing on the coach's voice.
That's right. And Dr. Cannell, he's drawing on, what, 40 years of coaching experience here?
Yeah, 40 years.
Looking at how coaching might need to shift for young people today. He uses that term internet brats, which is provocative.
It really is. Seems designed to make you think about maybe differences in attention or how kids interact with authority now.
Exactly. And this section we're looking at, it really zooms in on the coach's communication style, their philosophy, especially in practice and games.
And our plan today really is just to chat through this bit of the book. It feels like it throws up more questions than easy answers, honestly.
Mm.
And that's what we want to lean into. We'll sort of pull out some key points, ask the questions they make us ask, and think about what it means for, coaches, players, parents, anyone involved.
Yeah. It's a good way to look at some core ideas, authority, communication, how relationships work in coaching.
Definitely.
We'll touch on things like setting expectations, that really challenging idea of practice being a dictatorship,
Oh, yeah, that one jumped out.
how coaches look at their own methods, the difference between, feedback that works and feedback that just tears someone down.
And how respect builds that strong coach-player connection.
Exactly, that foundation.
So, okay, let's start with expectations. Dr. Cannell puts it plainly. I try to set the bar high. I expect a lot from my players, and I let them know when they are not applying themselves. What hits you about that directness?
Well, it's the clear link he makes, isn't it, between high standards and telling players directly about their effort.
Right.
The reasoning seems to be, look, practice is short, you need to get the most out of it, and players need to get that they're part of a team.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not applying yourself, you're not just affecting your own improvement, you're affecting everyone. The whole philosophy seems built on this idea of constant growth,
Yeah.
pushing past barriers, and understanding your team responsibility.
Okay, I get the logic. High bar, team effort makes sense. But, and this is where I get stuck a bit, how does letting them know when they are not applying themselves avoid becoming, well, belittling, which he warns against later?
Yeah.
That line feels really fine, doesn't it? Between pushing for effort and maybe crushing a player's confidence, it seems easy to get wrong.
That is absolutely the tightrope walk of good coaching, I think. And the key distinction, which, like you said, the source does get into later, is focusing feedback on the player's actions, not the player themselves.
Action's not the person.
Exactly. So addressing lack of effort means talking about specific observable things, like maybe they didn't track back on D, or they missed an assignment, or their focus drifted in a drill.
So it's that pass wasn't your best effort, not you're being lazy.
Precisely. It's about the action needing more effort.
Yeah.
The tone, the delivery, the relationship you've already built. That's what makes the difference between motivating feedback and, well, just hurtful criticism.
Speaking of strong language, let's dive into that next idea. It really grabs you. He says, I tell my players that a team is not a democratic society. It is a dictatorship with the coach being the dictator.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a statement.
So why? Why suggest a team is like a dictatorship, especially during practice?
Well, the reasons given in the source
Uh-huh.
really boil down to efficiency and control over limited time.
Time again.
Yeah. Practice, in this view, it's this intense focus window. You need to maximize every second. And that's just not possible, he argues, if everyone feels they have a voice and need to share it right then and there.
Oh, okay.
So the focus is on clear instructions, lots of reps. Players are specifically told, don't talk when the coach is talking. Don't interrupt. He might ask for opinions later, maybe after a game or something, but practice time itself, it demands tight control. Follow the plan.
Dictatorship, though. It's such a loaded word, isn't it?
Lots
It makes
of
you think
stuff.
of like zero input, absolute rule, which feels kind of different from how we often talk about modern teams needing, collaboration and buy-in.
It does feel different, yeah.
So, what are the upsides? I guess the efficiency, that focus he talks about. But the downsides, what are the risks? Could it kill creativity? Stop players thinking for themselves on the field?
Those are the big questions, aren't they?
Or just make players feel shut down, especially if they're used to having more say elsewhere?
Look, the benefit described is clear. Getting the most out of practice time. If you've got a detailed plan, cutting interruptions could mean faster skill development, maybe.
Right.
But the risks you mentioned are very real. Shutting down player voice might mean you miss crucial insights from their perspective on the ground. It could create a culture where players are just afraid to try things, afraid to make mistakes, because it's all about rigid instruction following.
Yeah.
It really throws up that fundamental challenge.
Yeah.
How do you get the necessary structure and direction, but still develop players who can think independently and contribute more than just obedience?
That balance seems incredibly tricky. And it leads right into the coach's role in all this, their own awareness.
Yeah.
The source really emphasizes coach self-evaluation. It says, it is a coach's role to continue to evaluate their approach. They must learn from coaching mistakes and their use of voice and tone.
Yeah, this is crucial. The point made is that, what works with one player might totally bomb with another. And even something that worked before might not work again with the same kid. Good coaches, it says, are open to suggestions, open to criticism. They recognize they don't have all the answers.
But, okay, how do coaches realistically evaluate their own voice and tone, especially when they're, in the thick of it, trying to be that dictator during a chaotic practice?
That's the hard part.
Getting honest feedback seems tough in that kind of environment, doesn't it? From players or even assistants.
It takes real conscious effort and humility, I think. The source does mention things like maybe asking for feedback after a tournament or letting players use journals to communicate sometimes.
So creating separate spaces for it.
Exactly. The coach has to intentionally build moments outside that intense practice structure where genuine feedback is possible. And this is key from his post, they have to be truly willing to hear it, even if it stings.
Yeah.
That's a real test of leadership, isn't it? Holding on to the necessary authority for practice, but still being open to learning and adjusting. It's about separating the how we operate right now from the how can we be better overall.
And another huge part of the coach's voice is the feedback they give, moment to moment. The source draws a really clear line here. Avoid belittling comments, avoid sarcasm. Effective feedback targets a player's actions, not the player themselves.
This is maybe one of the most critical points for how players actually experience coaching day to day.
Right.
And the source gives those direct examples which are powerful, saying that was a really stupid play, which is still pretty harsh, let's be honest.
Yeah, not exactly gentle.
No. But it's fundamentally different from yelling, "Are you ever stupid?" The first one is about the action. Second is just an attack on the person.
So what is it about that difference? Action versus person. Why does attacking the person land so much harder? What's the power dynamic doing there?
Well, when you attack the person, you're tapping into deeper stuff, aren't you?
Yeah.
Feelings of shame, inadequacy. It makes the player feel like their fundamental worth is being judged, not just a mistake they made.
Right, it makes it personal.
Deeply personal. It can shut down learning, make them afraid to try again. But focusing on the action keeps the feedback on behavior, something tangible, something that can be understood, corrected, improved next time.
Okay.
The source suggests that this kind of honest, consistent, action-focused feedback actually helps players internalize lessons. They strive to get better because they see the coach cares about their development, about the process.
Not just about pointing out flaws.
Exactly. Avoiding belittling is fundamental to building trust. It shows you believe in their potential, even when they mess up. It shows you care.
And this idea of care and trust, it all ties back to the bigger picture, building that strong coach-player relationship. The source says the relationship between coach and player grows when a common goal is in place and when respect is fostered. It can be a powerful relationship which can teach a large number of life skills.
Yeah, this connection is framed as incredibly important, way beyond just teaching X's and O's. The ingredients mentioned for building it, well, respect, obviously, described as universal. The coach being authentic, sharing their own story when it's right, being perceptive, reading an athlete's mood, asking if an approach worked. That shows you actually see them.
That you care, yeah.
And clearly communicating the goals, not just the team goals, but what each player needs to do to contribute to reaching them.
Okay, so the source implies respect is a two-way street here, even within that practice dictatorship model. So what does respect look like coming from the player in this kind of setup?
That's a good question. Within this structure, player respect probably looks like, well, being on time, listening when the coach speaks, not interrupting during drills.
Following the dictator's rules during practice time.
Kind of, yeah. Putting in the effort that's asked for, being accountable to teammates. It's showing respect for the plan, the team's time, the shared mission.
And what about the common goals? Is it just about winning trophies, or is it something more that builds this powerful bond?
While winning is often a goal, the source seems to suggest The process goals are just as important, maybe more so for the relationship. Things like, learning resilience from setbacks, focusing on personal growth, achieving team success, defined by effort and improvement. Not just the final score.
Right.
It's those shared aims, tackling the challenges together, combined with that mutual respect for roles and the process. That seems to be what creates that powerful bond, the kind that genuinely teaches life skills.
It's really clear these aren't meant as, like, commandments. They're principles from one coach's long experience designed to make you think.
Exactly. They provoke discussion. And while we've been talking sports coaching, these ideas, they echo, don't they?
Totally.
Setting expectations, handling authority, self-awareness and leadership, giving feedback that works, building relationships on respect and shared goals.
It applies everywhere. Managing a work team, teaching, like, leading any group, really.
Yeah, anywhere people work together towards something, it really underlines how communication shapes everything.
So to kind of wrap up our chat today,
Yeah.
we've explored this really thought-provoking section from Dr. Cannell's book on the coach's voice.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about those high expectations, the direct feedback on effort, that intense, maybe dictatorial view of practice time.
The absolute need for coaches to self-reflect, to be open to criticism,
Yeah, and that critical difference between attacking an action versus attacking the person in feedback.
and how it all comes back to building that foundation of respect and common goals for a powerful coach-player relationship.
Dr. Cannell's perspective, drawn from all those years, definitely highlights how complex coaching is today, balancing authority and connection.
Especially perhaps with a generation that communicates and relates differently.
So here's a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Thinking about that tension, the idea of practice as maybe needing a dictator versus the power of a relationship built on mutual respect. How do you see that balance between authority and collaboration playing out in the best teams or groups you've been part of? Something to maybe think about this week.